All right, hand up. I was wrong. We did not get an exciting race. We didn't even really get an eventful race. But Max Verstappen still surprises us all and wins the Japanese Grand Prix. Lando Norris finishes P2, Oscar Piastri finishes P3 to round off the podium. Max's fourth consecutive win at this track. How did Red Bull manage to pull this off, and how did McLaren manage to help Red Bull pull this off? The Yuki Tsunoda Red Bull debut, why it was good, why it was bad, and a few other talking points for the rest of the grid. What is going on with Ferrari? Some Alex Albon radio drama, and what to make of Isaac Hadjar finishing 45 seconds ahead of Liam Lawson. All coming up next on the Chicanery Podcast. Like I said in the intro, not the most exciting race. The only change in the top 10 between qualifying and the race results was Isaac Hadjar and Lewis Hamilton swapping 7th and 8th place. But Max Verstappen takes home his first win of the 2025 season and his first win since Qatar of last year. But how did he and Red Bull pull this off? First off, you have to give credit to Max himself. He not only put himself in this position with an incredible qualifying, but this was a mistake-free race by him. There were a few issues at the beginning of the race with his upshifts, but he and the team seemed to have figured it out pretty quickly. But his car was actually really good today and was a lot faster than anyone really expected. It wasn't a surprise to see Max hold the lead after the first lap and even into the first stint of the race, but you kept thinking, okay, McLaren must be saving their tires. Give it a few more laps, they'll start to close that gap, they'll start to pass him and get ahead. And it just never happened. Every time Lando would close the gap a little bit, Max would extend it back and regain that advantage. And Max just seemed calm, poised, and completely in control of this race from lights out to the checkered flag. And just mistake-free racing from him in a race where drivers were pushing flat out for all 53 laps. Now, Red Bull did bring an upgrade to this race with a new engine cover, which looks like it helped with the car's stability and rear wing performance. It's also been reported that this new engine cover yields a lot of benefits at a colder race like this one too. But this is a good sign, not only for the car and the car's performance and the prospects of the season, but also just a confidence boost for the development team, who look like they lost their way since Adrian Newey left the team. Now, Max did get lucky with a few external factors too that helped him win this race, the weather being the biggest factor. Again, it was just colder than expected, and the rain helped with this too. But because of this tire degradation, which has been a huge issue for this Red Bull team, was completely out the window. The weather conditions made it a rare thermal limiting race, meaning that drivers didn't need to worry about saving their tires and were able to push their cars 100% flat out, as long as they didn't overheat the tires. So not only did this neutralize a Red Bull weakness, but it also neutralized a McLaren strength as well. Because we've seen when tire degradation is a factor, the McLaren is just so much better at saving their tires than the other cars. So without that, their advantages can cut significantly. But on top of the tire deg being removed from the race, it's just hard to pass at this track. It's such a high-speed track with so many fast corners that you really only have one chance at an overtake going into turn 1 coming out of the DRS zone. And this was another track that proved to be another example of just how hard it is for this generation of Formula One cars to not only follow behind other cars, but pass them, because the dirty air from a car in front just slows you down so much. And we saw this not only with Lando trying to catch Max, but with Oscar trying to catch Lando too. I mean, there were times where Oscar definitely looked like the faster McLaren and faster than Lando, but he just couldn't get past Lando, even having a DRS advantage. Now, sticking with the McLarens, Max and the weather weren't the only factors that led to this Red Bull victory. Where did it go wrong for the Papaya team that led to them missing out on the top step of the podium? Where they really lost it was on Saturday, by not securing a front row lockout with both of these drivers. There isn't a doubt, looking at the practice sessions, looking at qualifying, even looking at parts of the race, that McLaren had the fastest car this weekend. And we talked about it a second ago, but it's difficult to pass around this track. And being behind another car in dirty air just hurts you so significantly. So yeah, letting Max get pole and being stuck behind him definitely hurt the race for both of these McLaren drivers. But knowing all of this, should McLaren have left one of their drivers out instead of pitting both of them on laps 21 and 22? Oscar was the first out of the top three to pit on lap 21, and he was in third. So the logical decision at that point, if you are going to keep a driver out, would be to keep Lando out. Give him that clean air and see if he can build enough of a lead to overcut Max with a later pit stop. Meanwhile, while he's doing that, Oscar likely closes that gap on Max in second and keeps that pressure on him. It would have been a risky move for McLaren, and one that either works for Lando at the end or puts him in third and creates a sticky situation with possibly swapping the two McLaren drivers at the end. But why not try it? At this point in the race, when the pit stops occurred, McLaren should have realized, hey, tire degradation is out the window. We can't close enough to Max in the dirty air, so we're probably not going to be able to pass him on track. Andrea Stella said after the race that it wouldn't have made a difference keeping either driver out for a longer first stint, and they still wouldn't have had enough to get ahead of Max. I don't buy it. To me, this seems like more of PR damage control than an honest assessment about the pit strategies. You can't have it both ways. You can't say, hey, being in clean air wouldn't have worked, our car just wasn't fast enough, and at the same time say, well, we lost the race in qualifying by letting Max get out in front as the lead car. Because what you're saying with qualifying is, if our cars were out in front in that clean air, we would have been faster and we would have won the race. It just doesn't add up. And it really makes you wonder what could have happened if McLaren mixed up the strategies between their two drivers. McLaren can afford to make these mistakes more than last year, but this kind of stuff still happens way too much for this team when it comes to strategies and just making those calls in the middle of the race, in those last-minute calls. And as dominant as they've looked to start the season, Lando's now only 1 point ahead of Max in the driver's standings. Red Bull brought some this weekend, but the rest of the teams are going to start bringing some upgrades soon, and the pecking order can really start to change like we saw last year. And McLaren has to figure out these strategy issues if they want to win both championships this year, like most of us expect. Going to the second Red Bull driver, not exactly the debut Yuki Tsunoda was looking for. Finishes P12 after starting 14th. A lot of this came down to his poor qualifying performance. And during the race, too, he spent so much time stuck behind Fernando Alonso and just couldn't get by him, which really slowed him down. Now, Red Bull doesn't seem too displeased with his performance. They know that most of this came down to that one mistake in qualifying, and the race result had a lot to do with the track conditions as well. But the team is encouraged by what they saw from Yuki during the free practice sessions in Q1, where he really wasn't that far off of Max's pace. I don't think this result is indicative of Yuki's true performance, and I think we'll see much better from him in the next few races. Again, the pressure on Yuki isn't the same as it was for Liam Lawson. I think Red Bull wants some stability with the seat after all of the driver movement they've had, but also Honda has paid Red Bull to keep Yuki in the seat for the rest of the season. But Yuki still needs to bounce back from this and put in better performances if he wants to keep that seat going into next year. The Honda partnership is ending, as we saw with the tribute with the white livery on the Red Bull. But Yuki won't have that financial security after this year. And we're starting to see some really good performances from Isaac Hadjar. And we all know how this team operates when there's a promising driver waiting in the wings. All right, going to some of the other teams. What is wrong with Ferrari? Charles Leclerc finishes P4 16 seconds off the lead. Lewis Hamilton finishes P7 29 seconds off the lead. But I think the most concerning part of this race for both drivers is how much of a gap they had to the cars in front of them. You would understand it a little more if they were stuck behind slower cars in front, had the stronger pace, and just couldn't get past them because of the track conditions. But Leclerc finished with a 14-second gap behind Oscar Piastri in third. The McLarens and Verstappen are just in another class than him right now, and this car looks nowhere close to competing for a race win. Lewis, on the other hand, not only finished 13 seconds behind his teammate, but finished almost 11 seconds behind Kimi Antonelli, who is the next car ahead of him. I'm honestly starting to worry a little bit about Lewis. It is only the third race of the season, but the gaps between him and his teammate are significant. Now, sure, he did win that sprint race in China, but you expected more out of him in this car. and it's just not happening. And more concerning for the team in general is just how far off the lead these two drivers are. I mean, this was a team that came into the season expecting to compete for the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships, and they are nowhere close to that. Now, it does look like the floor is a major problem for this car, and that was part of the reason for Hamilton's disqualification in China. The current floor that they have requires the ride height to be so low, but they can't drop the ride height to that level because it causes too much wear on the skid block that would lead to more disqualifications like we saw in China. So they're just stuck in no man's land right now. The good news for Ferrari, though, is they are expected to bring a new floor to Miami in a few weeks, so hopefully for them, that fixes all of these issues. But as of now, it doesn't look great for the Scuderia. Moving to Williams, are Alex Albon and his race engineer okay? We heard some pretty fiery radio messages from Albon during the race where he was just berating his race engineer, calling out the pit strategy and criticizing the team for screwing up the setup of the car, not listening to his advice. And this isn't the first time either that we've heard this from Alex Albon. Most notably, we heard it in Hungary of last year, but there have been moments this season too where we've heard some pretty testy radio messages from him. I think this stuff is a little more common than we think. I mean, think of the road rage you can get driving down the road in your car going 45 miles an hour. Now imagine going close to 200 miles an hour in a competitive format. It makes sense. But I think what makes this stick out is we know Albon as this somewhat quiet and shy, but very nice and sweet guy. So to see this side of him is like, whoa, wait a minute here, what's going on? But at the same time, we've seen radio messages like this from other drivers, and they've had that same kind of tone. Maybe Alex and his race engineer need to go out for a drink this week to smooth things over a little bit, but they'll be okay. While we're on Williams, though, another tough result for Carlos Sainz finishing P14. A lot of this came down to qualifying and the impeding penalty that dropped him down to 15th for the start, coupled with all of the difficulties passing cars on track. But a result that, at the least, is going to give Sainz just a kick while he's already down, and not what he needed. So, again, you hope he can bounce back. I don't think there's really any pressure on him at this point, based on his pedigree and where this team is coming from and hoping to go, but just not the start to the season you expected from him. Moving to the Racing Bulls, Isaac Hadjar finishes P8 to take home his first points of his Formula One career. An uneventful race for him, like most of the other drivers, but a really, really promising result. He was probably helped a little bit by the difficulties of passing other cars on track, but he still finished with a 3-second lead over Alex Albon behind him. And Albon didn't have a line of cars behind him that would make you think that Hadjar was holding anyone up. Now, going to his teammate Liam Lawson finishing P17, not great. But a lot of this came down to the pit strategy as well. They took a risk and tried to keep him out on the medium tires, hoping for a safety car in a cheap pit stop, but it just never came. He finally pits on lap 33. At the time when he comes into the pits, he's P10, comes out P16. Now, Liam was in 14th when everyone around him came into the pits, so it looks like this decision cost him 2, maybe 3 positions in the race. What was interesting, though, was they put him on the soft tires with 20 laps to go, when it looked like these tires could only last 10, 15 laps. So a little confusing there, but at the end of the day, it probably didn't matter too much just because of how difficult it was for cars to pass around each other. The concerning part for Liam, though, is Hadjar finishing 45 seconds ahead of him at the end of the race. The timing was probably exacerbated a little bit with the late pit stop for Liam, but at the same time, when the pit stop started occurring around lap 23, Hadjar was already 19 seconds ahead of Liam Lawson. Lawson needs to close the gap, and a lot of that starts with qualifying, especially at a track like this where passing is so difficult. I do think he will at least close the gap, and I think we'll see some races where Liam is the top Racing Bulls driver. But it's looking like a much more challenging task with Isaac Hadjar improving every weekend. Going to Mercedes, not a lot to talk about there. Pretty uneventful for them, but really the only action we saw was Kimi missing the chicane at the end of the lap a few times. But a good result for both drivers. There just wasn't any real action on track with either of them, like we saw with most of the grid. Now, Kimi did spend a few laps in the lead during the pit stops, which made him the youngest ever driver to lead a Formula One race. This was, however, the last race that he could have won to beat Max Verstappen's record as the youngest race winner in F1. So Max will get to hold on to that record at least for a little longer. But overall, for both of these Mercedes drivers, a pretty solid result and one that they should be happy with. On a final note, seems to be the common final note for my podcast, but a deceivingly not so great result for Jack Doohan. He started 19th and finished 15th, so on paper you would think, wow, this was a pretty good result, especially with how difficult it was to pass on track, but hey, he somehow managed to do it. Not really the case. He got a little bit of a boost with his pit strategy, started on the soft tires and switched to hards on lap 16. Because of this, he was able to overcut a lot of the cars around him and made it all the way up to 14th. Now, Sainz was able to catch him and actually make a pass on him, which we saw at the end of the race. But when Doohan crossed the finish line, he had 4 cars behind him within 3 seconds. Now, there was a little bit of a tire offset because he did have the older tires than these cars, but it was still very clear that his pace was a lot slower. And if this was a track where you could pass easier, he would have really fallen down the order and ended up 19th. I don't think he would have been 20th because of how far Lance Stroll was in that last place position, but definitely would have fallen all the way back to 19th. These next few races will be very important for Jack Doohan. Going into the season, we heard that he was only guaranteed 6 races. There hasn't been any confirmation whether that's true or not, but if it is, we're at the halfway point. And Doohan really hasn't shown anything that makes you think his seat is safe. And to make things worse, Alpine had Franco Colapinto out in Italy at Monza running tests for the car today. I hope this doesn't happen. I like Jack Doohan, and I hope he's given a fair shot and at least a full season to really figure this out and figure out if he's got the Formula One pedigree. But he's been given an unbelievable challenge, being asked to adapt to this car and perform so quickly, and he's not putting in the results to meet those expectations. And you have to start wondering if we're starting to see Liam Lawson 2.0, and if we'll see a change with this team in the near future. All right, that's it for today's episode. Probably the shortest race recap I've done up to this point. We can thank the lack of action on track for that today. The good news is, though, another race in the books, and we're off to the second leg of this triple header in Bahrain next weekend. I will, of course, be back with more episodes for that race weekend. A little different schedule. I've got some travel coming up over the weekend, so I'll do the race preview episode a little earlier in the week. But, of course, we'll be back on Sunday recapping everything that we saw in the Bahrain Grand Prix. Thanks to everyone for tuning in and listening. Like always, until next time.